Hi there, and welcome to our next session. This is about mastering workflow design. So if you've ever known your process really well, your team knows what they're doing, everybody pretty well knows your process, but then it comes time to documenting your process, and you sit down at the computer and you're kind of staring at that blank screen and wondering, what's the best way to do this? How should I organize this? How do I just even approach getting this workflow documented and set up so that my team can benefit from it? Well, if you've ever had that experience, then this session is for you. My name's Ann Perry, and I'm a workflow design consultant here at Process Street, which means that my job is to work with customers like you to help build your workflows with you as a dedicated strategist, or build them for you with our workflow design services. So this session is really about what I've learned personally after building hundreds of processes for all sorts of teams. And I'm going to share with you really the strategic thinking behind building a process. So there's one thing to understand, what do the buttons do? Where do I click to get the functionality I want? But it's another thing to just think strategically about how to approach documenting and building out a workflow. So let's dive in. There are 5 questions that you can ask yourself to help you strategically think through your workflows, and those are 4 W's and an H. We've got why, what, how, who, and when. So let's jump into the why. This question is really big picture about defining the workflow itself. So we do get a lot of questions where, let's say somebody works in a finance department and they'll say, I've got all the different finance duties, but should I make one workflow for everything I do? Should it be a whole bunch of different workflows? How does that really work? So the best way to think about that when you are sitting down to document a workflow is think about, why does this workflow exist? What's the point of this workflow? What's the objective of this workflow? What's the specific purpose? So when you ask yourself, why does this process exist, or does this workflow exist, that helps you to really clarify where one workflow ends and another one begins. So here's how to think about it. Each workflow has one specific purpose. And a workflow represents really a process with its own life cycle. So it has one starting point and one ending point. Here are a few examples. So a lab order workflow. Why does this exist? It's to track a lab order from the moment it's ordered to it being received and processed. Or let's look at employee onboarding. Why does this exist? To onboard a new employee from the moment of the decision to hire them through their orientation. One more example, a sales process. Why does this process exist? It's to qualify a lead from the first contact to the decision that they make to work with you or you make to work with them. So either the deal is closed or it's lost. So there's a beginning and an end. It's got a life cycle. That's why it exists. So here's some pitfalls that I've seen when kind of determining what is that, what that workflow is, why that workflow is there. One is being too vague. So I mentioned finance as an example. If you build a workflow just called finance, chances are there really should be multiple workflows in there. There's payroll, that's a workflow. There's quarterly reporting, that's a whole different workflow. There's tax prep that happens once a year, different workflow. Monthly reconciliation. These are different workflows, all sort of within the finance department. They each have their own why. The opposite pitfall can be true as well, which is breaking it down too small. So let's look at an example of video production. In most cases, you wouldn't need to separate workflows into a whole bunch of workflows to where there's one workflow for writing the script and a whole other workflow for editing the video and a whole other workflow for publishing the video. It's really easy, especially in Process Street, to organize your workflow to accommodate lots of people, your team collaborating on different pieces, and to accommodate different timelines and functions. So you don't want to be too vague, and you don't want to just break it up into too tiny of nitty-gritty little workflows. So just keep in mind, again, sort of why does this workflow exist? What's the starting point? What's the ending point? What's its life cycle? And that question why will help you define what's the workflow you're starting with. Now, one hint is that sometimes one workflow can lead to another. So let's say you've got a hiring workflow that you go through, you interview candidates, you decide if you're going to hire them, and then once you decide to hire them, it kicks off an onboarding workflow. Those are two separate workflows because they have two different purposes, but they lead to each other. So you can use Process Street to automate one workflow kicking off from another. So all that functionality is there. But again, thinking strategically, why does this workflow exist? Okay, our next question is the what. This is basically asking what needs to be done in this process. Now I'm going to jump over to Process Street to illustrate this so you're not just looking at a big slide that says what. So here we've got an example of an employee onboarding workflow. The what gets answered by the tasks. So here on the left-hand side, this is your what. So when you're thinking through your workflow, think of it as your to-do list. These are all the steps that are required to complete the process. So a task in Process Street, we call these tasks. These should answer the question, did this get done? Yes or no, which is why it's got a nice handy checkbox. Yes, it's been done, or nope, it hasn't been done yet. So tasks get checked off as your workflow progresses. And also keep in mind, a task can only be done by one person, and a task can only be done on one date. So you can even see here, we've got a different person assigned to different tasks. We're going to talk about the who and we're going to talk about the when, but just to keep in mind, only one task per date and per person. Now, another aspect of the what are headings. You can see here, we've got a heading called Onboarding Basics, another one called Employee Preparation. I like to think of the headings as your cocktail party explanation. These really organize your tasks into phases or categories. But let's say if you're meeting somebody at a cocktail party and they go, oh, tell me about your employee onboarding. You know, it's kind of loud in there. There's music. You're just probably going to highlight it with these headings. You're going to go, oh, well, like there's these basic onboarding pieces we need to gather. Then the employee prepares for their first day. Then we do some things before their first day. Then, you know, their first week happens and there's specific things we need to do. And then, you know, there's a training project. That's basically our employee onboarding. So you might keep it general, basic like that. Big picture categories, those are your headings. So let's talk about some pitfalls of the what. A pitfall would be being just too general in your tasks. So let's say the task says, promote the article. We're talking about writing blogs here, writing articles. So if the task says promote the article, but actually what's involved in promoting the article is you need to write the promotion copy, you need to have a peer review, you need manager approval, and it gets promoted via 6 different channels, well then that's actually several different tasks. That's numerous tasks. So promote the article in that case would be better as a heading, as a main category. Another pitfall would be adding too much detail to a task. So if you have a task that says something like click to the left side of your screen and another task that says click save, that's way too much detail and that's really more instruction. And we're going to talk about that in a moment with the how. So again, simply a task should answer the question, did this get done? Yes or no. So what needs to be done? Now, let's talk about the how. Jump back to our slides and our next question, how? So this is where we answer the question, how do I do it? This is where you would give the instructions of how it can be done, or it's where it's the actual doing of it. So this is with content and form fields. So whereas on the left-hand side here, we've got all the what, in the middle here in Process Street, when you click inside a task, you've got all of the how. So that can look like form fields where you're capturing all the information. So, okay, employee information and hiring details. How do I do that? Well, fill out this information, answer these questions. Send a welcome email. Okay, how do I do that? Well, you've got your email widget built out into Process Street ready to go for you, and you can just click it and send. So again, it's kind of the doing of it. It also could be instructions, content. So for example, this is a section here in our employee onboarding example where the employee themselves is going to do some tasks. And so we've got welcome to the team, Holly, watch this video. This is telling you how to do it. Review this company org chart. You've got the instructions. It's the how. So pitfalls with the how is just confusing instructions with to do. So with to-dos, in other words, with the tasks. So I mentioned before that your tasks should have only one due date per task, only one person per task. So what I've seen sometimes that it's not wrong, it's just missed opportunity as far as getting the most functionality out of Process Street and helping make the team's lives as easy as possible, is just adding way too much detail into the how when it's confusing the like who's doing what and how they're doing it and when they're doing it. For example, if you have instructions that say something like, be sure the manager approves this before sending the email, and then follow up on the document at least once a week for 3 weeks. If you're saying something like that in your how, in your instructions, there's actually some functionality buried in those instructions that could make your lives easier. So for example, be sure the manager approves before sending the email. It's like, that should just be a task. Be sure the manager approves. You've got an approval task. Sending the email is a separate task. And then follow up on the document at least once a week for 3 weeks. That's why we've got things like due dates, and you would make those separate tasks. So if you find yourself, or if you notice a workflow that you have that's kind of got some functionality buried in the how, that's an opportunity to just get a lot more effectiveness out of your workflow. Also, just to point out, so we talked about the form fields here where you're actually capturing data right inside the workflow. Keep in mind, we've talked about automations. We talked with the founder of Zapier. So in case you missed those sessions, be sure to check those out. But just keep in mind that all of the data you collect within a workflow can be passed to other applications via Zapier or via native automations within Process Street. So you can send this data back and forth to different places, which makes the how even easier for you. Just the doing of it is automatic. Okay. Let's jump to our next question, and this is the who. So when you are thinking through your workflow, you've said, okay, why does this workflow exist? Well, it's to onboard employees from the moment we've decided to hire them through their orientation. What needs to be done? So you've listed out all the steps that need to happen, all the tasks. You've talked about the how, so you've put all the form fields you need to capture, you've added all the instructions, and now you're going to ask who. So who does what is what you're asking here. Now this is where task assignments come in handy. Now this is super cool. There's several ways in Process Street that you can use assignments. So number one, task assignments. This is just when you can see it, and I kind of pointed out before, these icons that are connected to each task. That's the who's doing what. Now, you can see task assignments are when you have a specific person who's always responsible for the same task. So in this example, we've got Tony Stark is always responsible for these tasks. It's just always going to be Tony. Every single time we run a workflow, Tony does these things. Now, a good example of that would be, let's say Candace, the CEO, is always the person who needs to approve expenditures above a certain dollar amount. That's never going to be assigned to anybody else. It's always going to be Candace, the individual. Then you can use task assignments and just have things automatically assigned to that person every single time. Another way to do assignments is with group assignments. So you can see here, we've got this little orange icon. This is our human resources group. Now, this one isn't used as often as some of the other ways that I just talked about and will continue to talk about for assignments. But group assignments are good when you have kind of an agreement amongst your team, a first come, first serve, grab that task, whoever is sort of on hand at the time. So for example, let's say you've got a front desk staff that it's just different people working every day and they share duties. So it doesn't need to be a specific person. It just needs to be done by whoever is working the front desk that day. So you might just have a front desk group, something like that. So in this case, we've got a human resources group, and it's basically just whoever happens to see it first, they're the one who's going to work on it. So rather than an individual, it's just like anyone in that group of people can do it. Now, the really, really powerful one is role assignments. This is good when a task needs to be assigned to a specific person, but that person changes each time. So for example, in this case, we've got there's certain tasks that need to be accomplished by the supervisor, but there's a different supervisor for each employee depending on, what department they're in and different things like that, what position it is. So watch what happens. We can just say, okay, well, who's the supervisor for our new employee, Holly Bright here? We're going to say Dana, that is the supervisor. Now notice the moment that I select Dana from that dropdown, Dana gets assigned to certain tasks. There she is. So that's role assignments, when it's not always the same individual, but it's more so based on their role. Now, there are other ways to use role assignments. One way is by email. So what we did here, you can see we've got the icon for Holly here. That got assigned when we entered her email address right here. So as soon as we entered Holly's email address, that assigned her to these tasks. And what's cool about that is Holly doesn't even need to be a paid member in Process Street. She can be a guest. And in this case, she is, because she's a new employee. She's not going to be using Process Street quite yet, but we want her to go through, this is her personal email. We just want her to go through and prepare for her first day on the job. So we want to invite her as a guest user. Well, we can still easily, just by entering her email address, it automatically assigned her to those roles. One more way that you can use role assignments is just by the workflow runner. So you didn't see it happen, but I'm the one who ran this workflow. And so I'm the person who got assigned to this first task. Let's say we've just, numerous people on a team need to run a workflow. Let's say you've got a paid time off request workflow, and there's some tasks that whoever runs it needs to do those tasks. Well, you can set it so that whoever runs that workflow, they are automatically the person assigned to certain tasks. So you don't need to know in advance who it is. You don't need to even have them select their name from a list. It's just automatic. It's going to be the workflow runner. So as you are building out your workflows, again, keep in mind who does what. Okay, let's talk about the when. When are things supposed to be done? When does it get done? So the feature in Process Street that really is helpful with this is dynamic due dates. What's super cool about this is that you have a dynamic timeline that unrolls itself as you go. So you can have dates automatically trigger based on when that workflow was run. So these just triggered based off of that. You can also have dates trigger off of another date that you capture. So in this example, we're onboarding an employee. There's lots of things that are dependent on their start date. So let's say they're starting on October 15th. The moment we select that their start date is October 15th, look at how the timeline reveals itself. So certain things need to be done a certain number of days before they start. Some things happen after they start. It all hinges on that date. So you can base dates off of when the workflow run was created, off of date fields, off of when the workflow run is due. Lots of ways to do that. Now, what's really, really helpful, when you include both assignments and due dates, when you have the who and the when built into Process Street, what happens is your reports become so much more powerful, and same with your inbox. Your inbox is basically a customized to-do list that's just handing you answering the question, what should I focus on today? Handing you the answer on a platter. So I can see, oh, I'm overdue on this task here for Cassandra Irby and her employee onboarding. But all these other tasks, they're coming up. I can get a head start and see when they're due, and they'll always show up in my list for today. So you can see we're working on numerous different people that we're onboarding, but it tells me what I should be focused on and when. And that works because we've got the who and the when combined. We have assignments and due dates, and that makes this inbox really powerful. And then same with reports. You can see what's going on. Let's look at our current onboarding report. We can see who we're onboarding, where we're at. We're over track or overdue on some things, who's supposed to be doing it. Lots of ways to just see the data you need to see so you can keep a good view on what's going on in your workflows. So to recap, we talked about 4 W's and an H. We talked about why. That's basically defining the workflow. Why does this workflow exist? What needs to be done? Those are all of your tasks. How do those tasks get done? That's with all your form fields and with your content where you provide instructions. Who does each task? And when is each task supposed to be done? So whether you build your workflow in Process Street yourself, whether you're just strategizing with a colleague or you're having us build your workflow for you or with you, those questions should really help just think through the best way to build that out. The biggest takeaway that I can offer here today is to take the time to leverage your time. So I love this little comic of these cavemen who are basically refusing to grab the wheel that's being handed them because they're just too busy. They have to keep pulling their cart on the little square wheels. So don't be those guys, and take the time to leverage your time, or delegate to someone on your team, or delegate to us. So we know that, you're listening to this session, you've been with us on Highway 2021, so you know that it's really important to document your workflows, to have things systemized in your business. But also we know that taking the time and energy out to streamline your workflows can often feel like this. Well, hopefully the 5 questions we talked about, the 4 W's and an H, help kind of take this little squiggly, messy spaghetti ball, clean that up a bit and help clear it up. But if you want more support, feel free to reach out, because our workflow design team will build your workflows with you or for you. And I would be personally happy to explore with you if that's a fit. So we build workflows. We offer strategy and guidance. We set up automations and integrations. We help your team be all trained up. And for our enterprise customers, even ongoing maintenance. If that is something that you are interested in, then please set up a meeting with me. This link right here will take you to my personal calendar, and we can explore what you're up to. I'd love to hear about your goals, and we can see if this is a good fit for you or not. And either way is great. tinyurl.com/workflow design. So tinyurl.com/workflow design is just a little shortcut link to my calendar. Would love to chat with you, and thank you so much for listening and for joining me and talking about workflow design mastery. All right, have a wonderful rest of your day. Okay, well, it is me following me again. Thanks guys for listening to that. I just popped the link in the chat there, setting up a workflow exploration call with me. So what I'd like to do now, our next session is we are going to have a fireside chat with Rich Wong, who's a general partner at Excel. And Excel is one of the most active venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. That's what Excel is. And Rich is full of insights. He's going to be speaking with Vinay again, our CEO, and my colleague Blake Thorne, our senior product marketing manager, is going to be conducting that interview. So definitely stick around for that. This is really about what makes a truly great company from the perspective of an investor. So that is going to be really exciting. Stick around for that. And in the meantime, what I would love to hear from you, for those of you who have been here all day, for those of you who have been here for just part of the sessions, I am super curious. What are your big takeaways? What are your aha moments? Again, questions as always, but share in the chat just some of your takeaways that you've had. Anything that you're going to implement or apply to your own business. Really curious to hear about that. So I'm going to look for those. And then anybody who participates in that conversation, I'm going to do our little fancy raffle with anybody who jumps in with an aha or takeaway, and we will be giving out some more merchandise and or strategy session after this next session. So there was a great question in here while you guys are popping in your takeaways and your aha moments. Terry asked about assignments, and it looks like that question was answered. But Terry, if you have follow-up questions on the best way to assign your team to tasks, and somebody else asked if we have 24/7 live support chat. Any questions you ever have at any time, just about features, about how to do something, if you get stuck, you can email us anytime at support@process.st, support@process.st, or by clicking the little help button in the lower right corner when you're logged into Process Street. And we're not 24/7, but we are now 24/5, which is super exciting. So Monday through Friday, all time zones, we've got your back. But this question I was going to answer real quick. Terry asks, what are the best ways for handling parallel work for a particular task, or when in a process, certain tasks need to be done by one person while another task needs to be done by another person? So I love this question. The way that it works, I think of it as like there's two types of processes. One of them is something that can happen simultaneously, and one is that needs to happen more like an assembly line. So I think of it as like, so by default, actually, the work can happen simultaneously. If you want to make it so that it can't, you can use the stop task feature, and that enforces order. But the simultaneous type of process is like, imagine there's a racetrack and the car, these cars are going around the racetrack. The car pulls over to get its maintenance done, and like 5 mechanics rush in and they're all working on it at once. That's a process, and it's a simultaneous process. So you can certainly set up your workflows like that in Process Street, and by default, they actually are that way. And then there's another type of process, which is more like the assembly line process. So that would be, you're building a car, and you obviously can't put, the tires on until the body's been built, and it needs to happen one thing at a time in order. So you can build workflows to be an assembly line style. And the way that you do that and enforce orders, again, with that stop task feature. So check that out. Okay, so some aha moments here. We've had to explore pages. Joseph says to explore pages. Yep. And the value is looking to link web forms to workflow. Cool. Imran says the aha session was with Adam. That's awesome. I'm super curious what specifically your aha moment was. We can pass that on to Adam. So many more ways to use workflows. That's awesome. Paula, I'm a broken record here, but you can make automations change file names? Wow, I know. Sometimes the things that just take nitty-gritty time can be done by the machines, and let's let the machines do that so the humans can do what they're awesome at. Pamela says, I like pages, and I really like the idea of starting the day with Qigong. Yes, that's awesome. Prioritizing which workflows to create and start structuring them. Yeah, that's great. The connection between pages and workflows, love it. Okay, awesome. Well, we've just got less than a minute until our next session, so stay tuned for that. Keep popping in your ahas and takeaways and your questions. We'll do a raffle drawing while this next session's going on. We'll announce the winner after this. And yeah, enjoy the next session.